My kitchen in Denver, Colorado, has always been my sanctuary, a quiet space where the sunlight streams through the window over my herb garden. But that morning, it felt like a war zone. Emily, my 30-year-old daughter, stood opposite me, her kombucha clutched tight in her hand. "Mom," she started, her voice laced with that familiar condescension. "You're just bitter. You failed at life." The words hung in the air, a cruel echo. Bitter. Failed at life. They weren't hers, not really. They were his. My father, Richard, used to say the same thing to me, with that same smug smile. Emily had never met him, not truly. He died when she was just a baby, leaving behind a carefully crafted myth. And Emily, my sweet, smart Emily, had swallowed it whole. I swallowed hard, the bitterness a tangible thing in my throat. "Emily, that's not fair," I managed, my voice softer than I'd intended. "Oh, it's perfectly fair," she shot back, waving her free hand dismissively. "Grandpa Richard was a titan. Everyone says so. A brilliant attorney, a pillar of the community. And you? You just don't measure up. You're always stuck in the past, holding on to some grudge." A grudge? It wasn't a grudge. It was a history, a trauma, a legacy of deceit that had shadowed my entire life. Richard, my father, was a master illusionist. To the world, he was a respected lawyer with an office in downtown Denver, a philanthropist, a man of integrity. To my mother, Eleanor, and me, he was a different person entirely. A man who systematically drained our family's finances, not through bad investments, but through outright fraud. A man who had a second family, a mistress he supported lavishly, while my mother struggled to keep food on the table in our little house in Littleton. I remember Eleanor, my gentle, brilliant mother, confined to her bed in her last years. She was the real strength in our family. Despite her illness, she saw him for what he was. She knew his charm was a weapon, his grand gestures a smokescreen. And she knew, with a chilling foresight, that one day his carefully constructed lies might impact Emily. It was during those quiet afternoons when I thought she was resting that she was actually working. Methodically, patiently, she gathered evidence. Bank statements, signed affidavits from people he'd defrauded, even a photo of him with his other family. She compiled it all into a worn, unassuming manila folder. I can still see her frail hand writing on the tab in her elegant cursive, "If she ever asks who he really was." That folder sat in my study for decades, a silent sentinel waiting. Emily interrupted my thoughts. "Anyway, Mark and I have something exciting to tell you." Mark was her fiancé, a man to whom, to me, felt less like a person than more like a human LinkedIn profile. Everything was about branding, networking, and strategic alliances. He saw Emily as his greatest asset, and her idealized image of her grandfather as a useful tool. "We're hosting a memorial brunch for Grandpa Richard next Saturday at the old Whittemore House in Sherry Creek, Denver. Mark's firm is sponsoring it." My stomach dropped. A memorial brunch? For Richard? He didn't deserve a memorial, not one built on lies. "A brunch?" I asked, my voice thin. "Yes, a celebration of his life and legacy." Emily beamed, completely oblivious. "And we want you to speak. Just a short, heartfelt eulogy. Nothing too dramatic, you know? Just how much he meant to you, to our family." I stared at her, this beautiful, confident woman who was so utterly blind to the truth. She was so convinced of her grandfather's greatness, her judgment clouded by Mark's relentless pursuit of social climbing. "Emily," I began, but the words caught in my throat. How could I tell her? How could I shatter her carefully constructed reality? A few days later, an email arrived from Mark. It was a draft of my proposed eulogy. I opened it, my hands shaking. It was a saccharine ode to Richard filled with fabricated anecdotes of his generosity, his unwavering moral compass, his devotion to family. It spoke of a man I had never known. This wasn't just a request, it was a demand to participate in the lie. That's when I knew. The folder in my study. Its time had come. 2 days before the brunch, Emily came over again. She found me in my study, staring at the folder. "Still clinging to that story, Mom?" she asked, her voice softer, almost pitying. It's unhealthy. You're obsessed with something that happened years ago." I didn't say a word. I just slid the manila folder across my mahogany desk, pushing it gently towards her. It was a silent offering, an unspoken challenge. The choice was hers. She looked at it, then at me, her brow furrowed. After a long moment, she pushed back her chair. "I have to go," she said abruptly, then turned and walked out, leaving the folder untouched. My heart sunk. Had I misjudged her? Was she truly unwilling to see? Later that evening, my phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Mom, is what I just found online true about Grandpa Richard and the taxes?" My breath hitched. She had searched. She had found something. It wasn't the folder, not yet, but it was a crack in her perfect facade, a tiny ray of hope. The Whittemore House ballroom was packed. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and the scent of expensive perfume mingled with the aroma of gourmet coffee. Mark, ever the impresario, circulated, shaking hands, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. Emily, radiant in a cream-colored dress, stood by his side, greeting guests. The room buzzed with the shallow hum of polite conversation and false tributes to a man none of them truly knew. When it was time for me to speak, I walked to the podium, the manila folder clutched in my trembling hands. I looked at Emily, her eyes wide, a flicker of apprehension there now. Mark gave me a subtle nod, expecting the pre-approved eulogy. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady, though my knees felt weak. "We are here today to remember Richard Maxwell, my father, Emily's grandfather." I paused, taking a deep breath. For many years, I have held a different truth about my father, a truth I felt compelled to share today, not to diminish his memory, but to truly honor what his life represented. I opened the folder. My mother, Eleanor, foresaw this day. She knew that the truth, no matter how painful, would eventually need to come to light. She painstakingly gathered evidence, not out of malice, but out of a fierce devotion to truth. So, I won't be reading the eulogy provided to me. Instead, I'll share some excerpts from documents my mother preserved. A ripple of unease went through the room. I ignored it. I pulled out the first document. "This," I said, holding up a faded letter, "is a handwritten note to the IRS confessing to years of tax evasion, signed Richard Maxwell." Murmurs erupted. Next, I held up a smaller, perfumed note. "This is a love letter written by my father, not to my mother, but to his mistress, detailing plans for a lavish vacation financed by funds stolen from his clients." Gasps! Mark's face was beet red. He stood up and, without a word, strode out of the room. Finally, I pulled out a tattered piece of paper. "And this," I said, my voice cracking slightly, "is an eviction notice served on his own elderly mother after he fraudulently took possession of her home in Littleton." The room was silent. A thick, heavy silence. I didn't look at anyone. I just closed the folder. That was the real Richard Maxwell. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. A man who built his empire on the ruins of others' lives. I stepped away from the podium. I found Emily outside, barefoot in the soft grass, clutching the folder. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. The makeup she had applied so carefully that morning was streaked. "Mom," she choked out, her voice raw. I I thought he was everything. I said things I can't take back." I reached out, my hand resting gently on her arm. "I know, sweetie," I said, my heart aching for her. We stood there, the silence between us heavy with unspoken grief and the weight of newly revealed truths.